and welcome to Coffee House Shots. I'm Lucy Dunn and today I'm joined by Katie Bowles and Kate Andrews. Prime Minister Keir Starmer was in the West Midlands this afternoon delivering a pro-growth speech in the wake of Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, which have seriously spooked industry figures and led to the financial markets plummeting for the third day in a row. Kate, the global stock markets are continuing to fall and sparking fears about a global recession. Just how significant is the stock market turmoil, and is there any chance it could persuade Trump to reverse these tariffs?
It's incredibly significant. We're looking at numbers that are reflecting things that happened during the financial crash that have reflected some of the most major financial moments, certainly in modern American history, and looking across the world. And the difference between this one and, say, for example, the COVID crisis or even the financial crisis is certainly politicians and cover-ups and bad public policy was involved in what's come before, but the very deliberate attempt to create turmoil, to turn everything on its head, was what Donald Trump and his cabinet set out to do last Wednesday in the Rose Garden. And we are seeing the market reaction to that just in complete freefall. I shouldn't say complete freefall. There was a slight turnaround this morning, but this just speaks to the messiness of the situation. It looked like stock markets were rallying for a mere moment because of a misunderstanding and a few rogue tweets that went out that misattributed comments of Trump's economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, about a potential pause on the tariffs for 90 days. He didn't actually say it. And once that was confirmed, they started to plummet again. But I do think just how messy this is and the extent of the turmoil has to be highlighted and is part of what makes this so unique, because we are getting such mixed messaging. Donald Trump last night was telling reporters there's no room for negotiation. He was more upfront than he has been over the past couple of days about how these so-called tariffs were actually calculated, because last night he was talking about trade deficits. That's actually how they got this figure. They took trade deficits between America and other countries, replaced dollar signs with percentages, and then ushered in the biggest tariff regime that, we can possibly fathom, making America one of the most protectionist countries in the world, certainly in the West. He was telling reporters last night there's no negotiation. Now Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is headed to the White House to talk about the 17% tariff rate put on Israel. Everyone's watching to see how that goes, whether or not there could potentially be a template to reduce these tariffs. Trump very recently, just today, tweeted that he's had dozens of countries getting in touch. More than 50 countries, he said, have reached out to begin negotiations. So now people are asking again, wait, are negotiations on the table? And it's most interesting to speak to Trump supporters in D.C. who are really on board with these tariffs, who like the idea of tariffs and who supported Donald Trump in this plan, because you are getting a sense of frustration, not from everybody, but from some of those Trump supporters, people in public policy who wanted to see tariffs happen because this was not the way they wanted it to happen. They wanted Congress to be involved. They wanted a serious rethink of trade policy for the next 50, 100 years. They wanted it targeted at countries like China that they do not think have American interests at heart. And instead, you have this chaos, absolute chaos. And I think for a lot of people, I don't really know how they ever expected it to go, but they had a much dreamier vision of how Trump might tackle tariffs than what the reality is panning out to be.
And Katie, what do you make of what Keir Starmer said today in his speech about growth, but also addressing those tariffs? And do you think he's done enough to alleviate the concerns of businesses in the UK?
I think it's probably only so much any leader can do to alleviate concerns on tariffs, particularly if they're not Donald Trump, because it's not in their control. I think Keir Starmer is doing a fairly good game of having a reassuring voice and suggesting his government is taking action. But you look at some of the things, for example, that Keir Starmer has announced. So one is a slight softening of the electric car target for 2030 to have more exemptions up until 2035. Now, this was something that's being looked at for some time. It was part of what was going to be the industrial strategy. And it feels as though recent events have meant that they moved forward the announcement a bit. And obviously now saying, this is one step we're taking to alleviate pain for businesses. Now, that's not false, but it's also not something that's completely organic or separate. So, two things can be true at once. There's been a hint that there could be more to come when it comes to industrial strategy or even potential some tax carve-outs for companies, industries that need specific help. I think Keir Starmer is showing his government is happy to be quite agile on this, so that is something. But the bigger picture is one where it is largely outside of the UK government and any other government's control. Now, the UK government is going to keep pushing for this limited trade deal. Lots of the negotiations have already taken place. I think the concern is this a priority of the US administration? Are they going to prioritise talks with larger trading partners, all those with higher tariffs slapped on them rather than the UK's? We know from what Donald Trump said last week, where he said, Keir Starmer's very happy with his 10% tariff. A little bit of a stretch. I don't think he's delighted, but I think he's a bit relieved. Are they going to be seen as the first in line, or do they have an okay enough deal that they're a little bit further down the line? And then I think finally, in UK government, lots of figures are just watching on at the moment and wondering, I think what a lot of people are wondering, which is Donald Trump going to blink? Is market pressure going to be high enough that Donald Trump has to take a slightly different course or dilute it? And the messages are confusing here, but you also have a small sense, and Kate will know much more than me on this, but there seems to be hints that the fracturing of the Trump coalition is underway. You have, business owners, billionaires who back Trump calling for him to act swiftly. You have Elon Musk tweeting selected videos on free trade. You can't find a specific quote against Trump in them, but all that is adding up to say that, some of his key backers do not support this wholeheartedly.
And Kate, on that, I suppose, do you feel as though there's a sense that the Republican Party may be having doubts about having elected Trump to be the president of the US in the wake of all this?
We haven't had a proper set of opinion polls come out to show Trump's approval rating since the chaos has started. So it's hard to know how much the needle has moved. Look, my suspicion is that if you ask grassroots supporters how they feel about Donald Trump now, you will get an even more enthusiastic response than you got during the election, which was more enthusiastic than 2020, which was more enthusiastic than 2016. If you're on the Trump train, you're going full speed. But I think what Katie mentions there is an incredibly important and slightly more nuanced point about how the politics of this is all going to shake out. Trump didn't just win, he won big. He won every swing state. He moved the dial so much because he brought together a really interesting broad coalition of voters, which included working class, blue collar American voters, potentially Democrat voters for much of their lives, and also these tech bros and these billionaires and people on Wall Street who came together because they liked a lot of what the president was preaching. And I think that certain groups just casually ignored other parts of what Trump was saying. So the Wall Street folk and Elon Musk and the Silicon Valley folk, they loved the idea of Doge. They loved the idea of government efficiency and rolling back parts of the state. And, perhaps they didn't take Trump so seriously when he told us for a year that he was going to implement substantial tariffs, at least on Canada and Mexico and China, if not the rest of the world. It's an interesting question about how where the pressure points are and what could potentially convince Trump to start to shift on this. Elon Musk's voice still matters very much, and the White House last week came out to say that all of these rumors that he was going to exit early just weren't the case. But it is very clear that Elon Musk is not down for the count for the entire Trump administration, nor was he ever planning to be. That's really come to the surface over the past couple of days. So the fact that Elon Musk actually is now coming out, and he's been so careful not to do this in the past, and hint towards his free market sympathies is only more evidence that this relationship he's here for a good time. He's not here for a long time. And perhaps he's going to be a little bit more vocal about his own beliefs, not just reflecting the president's agenda. I think really what could get Trump into some trouble is that him and his cabinet are coming out with comments right now and videos that are just odd. Trump posting him golfing in Florida over the weekend. Just a video of him out on the green, golfing away. Scott Bessent, his Treasury Secretary, on the media round yesterday, said that he doesn't think retirees or potential upcoming retirees in America are worried about the stock market crashing, to which everyone was like, you're supposed to be the voice of reason, Scott Bassett. You're supposed to be the guy who Trump put in that role to keep everybody calm. And, let me tell you, my parents or my grandparents who are retiring, they're freaking out about what they're seeing happening to their savings. So the narrative is off. The cabinet's all going a bit rogue in different directions on tariffs. It's clear that that the lines that they thought were going to be persuasive certainly haven't persuaded investors, and they certainly haven't persuaded markets. But also, very quickly on Katie's point about a potential free trade deal with the UK, the real sticking point here is that the one thing that they keep repeating, the cabinet keeps repeating, I think because it is a fair point, even though it does not justify tariffs anyway, is that the rest of the world has been really unfair to American agriculture and American beef and American poultry, and that they have had a bad attitude about it, that they've spread lies and myths about the effects of it and the health benefits or the health drawbacks, and that's unfair. And I think it's a reasonable point for the Trump administration to make. I don't think it in any way justifies the utter upheaval that they have just caused. But that's going to be tricky for the UK, because the one thing the UK is going to want to keep out of any deal is agriculture. And that is exactly the point that they feel like they can confidently make right now in order to try to justify what they've done.
And Kate, I might just ask you a final question, if I may.
You may.
That's so delightful. You mentioned the calm, almost, Donald Trump on the golf course. And there have been some comparisons. If I think about some of the calm from those in the inner circle of Liz Truss after the mini budget, and there have been some comparisons. It does feel different in some ways. But do you think there is any read across between the Liz Truss mini budget and the market reaction and what we're seeing now? Or if not, can you explain to us why? Because you're wiser than me.
Oh, I don't know about that. So look, it's hard to make comparisons because just the global scale of what Donald Trump has done has us asking, Liz who? Now, there are a lot of politicians who would love to have their own hiccups forgotten in history because somebody did worse. I'm actually not sure Liz Truss is one of them. She may be disappointed she didn't get to outdo Donald Trump. But I mean, the scale of how this is affecting every country in the world, not just one, is a big difference. I think also, gosh, if we're to be slightly generous to Liz Truss here, the decisions she made was very poorly timed with a trend that was already happening worldwide that countries simply couldn't avoid, which was that post-spending, post-pandemic, interest rates were going to be going up worldwide. And she decided to go on a spending spree at a really inopportune time, and the government should have known better because they had all those graphs right in front of them too, just as we all did. But there was a global trend taking place out of politicians' control. Trump's decision to launch a trade war on the entire world is very much in his control. I actually wonder if the biggest comparison is what's happening to tariff supporters now, similarly to sort of some of the denial, but also just the sheer disappointment that happened to Liz Truss supporters at the time, which was, we had a vision. Why did you execute it so poorly? We had a moment to start talking about tax cuts in a smaller state. What have you done? And if you speak to people again who really are on the Trump train and really pro tariff, there is a lot of disappointment that he hasn't gone through Congress, that he hasn't done this with a medium-term approach, that he's decided to turn people off to these ideas in a very radical way. A lot of confusion as to why he didn't keep targeting countries like China and decided to go after his closest allies. A lot of confusion as to why he's gone after countries in which the U.S. has a trade surplus. That there is, I think, a real fear among some tariff supporters that you'll meet in D.C. who think that if this continues to go as badly, and really in their minds, if Trump has to roll it back, just like Jeremy Hunt had to roll back Liz Truss's mini budget, that the opportunity will be gone for many, many decades. And, I'm slightly relieved by that. If there is a free market renaissance because of what Donald Trump is doing, in my mind, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. But in their minds, in his supporters' minds, that would be a real travesty. I'm not sure Trussonomics and Trumponomics really do fit in the exact same camp. But there is potentially a comparison to be made about what happens when you just go for it. without really thinking about the other implications and consequences that might come with it.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Katie. And thank you for listening.